They say if you've done anything over 10 years, you're considered an expert. Well, today I'm bringing in an expert, my husband, and we're going to address a very requested video over some end of life planning issues. I hope you'll stick around. If you are joining me for the first time, I'm Bonita from Pennies to Dollars, and I normally do videos on frugal living, saving money, cutting expenses, and living your best life on less. I'm an early retiree at the end of October. I retired at 57, and I've been a lifelong nursing home administrator over my career of 24 years. But today I'm bringing in my husband, who a lot of people have been very curious about. So here he is. This is Brent.
Hello.
And he is an expert in funeral services. And I've had a lot of people talk about end of life services and planning and wanting some information on that. So I'm going to have him join us today. We're going to talk about how to plan an affordable, meaningful memorial at a decent price that leaves everybody feeling like they have came to a really nice service and that they are getting closure. Now, I have the experience of I've lost some family members. So trigger warning there. But I'm going to let you know I have lost some family members. I have planned some funerals. I was not knowledgeable about that when I did it, but my dad, we lost him and he only wanted a graveside service. A lot of people are going to that because it's more affordable, but we made the graveside service more like a funeral. We played music, we set up a table with pictures and memories. Family was able to contribute and share memories there. And the minister was willing to stay for like 30 minutes. And it turned out to be a really nice service. And then we went to the church afterwards and had dinner. So we had time to spend together as a family, but we didn't have the traditional service that was in like the mortuary. So I'm going to then turn this to Brent. And Brent, can you share with us a little bit about how to plan an affordable, meaningful memorial service?
I sure can. I've been in the funeral industry for off and on for 24 years. I have been in the sales side. I've met with families. I've worked in the prep room. I have been in management. And so I've been around that industry quite a bit. And the first thing I need to say about an affordable plan is to shop. Don't let tradition dictate where you go. Most people do not realize that under federal law, through the Federal Trade Commission, that all funeral homes must provide you with a general price list upon your asking. They have to do that. You can walk into any funeral home, say, I want a general price list or GPL, and they have to give it to you. If they don't, they can be fined quite heavily by the Federal Trade Commission. So that helps you with your shopping. And it may sound maybe a little crass to shop, but that's really what you need to do. And one of the reasons for that is there are several companies that over the past few decades have bought up many funeral homes in small towns and large cities all over the country. And they have not created a monopoly, but they have created an era of great inflation in the funeral industry. So you need to shop around. I always suggest shopping your locally owned funeral homes first because they are going to work with you. They are going to generally be cheaper. Just a little example is the last place I worked was a corporate funeral home. And they got mad at me because I pointed out that a burial vault that we sold for $9,000 was being sold up the street from us by a locally owned for $3,600, and they got upset with me over that.
And that's a huge difference in price, as you can see. Now, I'm from a rural area. We both live out here in this rural area. We have like a family cemetery in two different towns for both sides of my family. The plots are very affordable there, and we have some plots that were purchased by my grandparents that have then been deeded over through the generations so that we have extra plots to use. And I'm responsible for those plots. And I've been able to help family members when we've had this come up use one of those plots. But both of those funeral homes that are about 20 miles away in both directions are the ones that our family uses. And they are much more affordable than the city funeral homes, which my husband has experience working in. So I also want to address starting a trust. I do have some experience with that. I do plan on starting a trust for myself. And that's where you can go in and set it up with the funeral home to put some money, like in a savings account, towards your services. And you can draw interest on this over time, and you can add money to it over time. I've done this for my brother. I have all of that prepaid and set up, the one that I've told you about that's in the nursing home. He is getting ready to turn 67. His stone has already been made, it's already been placed, it's already been engraved, and I have his trust set up. Now, since he was on state services, we did have to check and see what the amount was that we were allowed to prepay towards a funeral for him. And in the state of Kansas, it's around $11,000. So we were able to set up his funeral services in a trust that will draw interest that is around $11,000. And you want to make sure that things are included in that trust that you know you're going to need, like chairs at the service, the tent, all of those things are included in that trust, including like opening, closing of the plot that you're going to put them in. There's a lot of things that go into that that will be included in that. But that's my experience with trusts so far. Brent, can you speak about like pre-planned funeral plans for us a little bit?
Yes. And one thing you mentioned there was that your opening and closing and things like that was in your funeral trust. That's something that you generally want to try to avoid. You want to have your cemetery cost paid for with the cemetery and your funeral cost paid for through the funeral home. And there's a good reason for that, because when you pay for those things where they occur, such as your cemetery opening, closing, your plot, things like that, that locks in the prices. It's paid for, and inflation does not affect it from then on. If you pay for it through your funeral trust at the funeral home, then that doesn't stop the cemetery from increasing your price. And that money may or may not be enough in your funeral trust. Funeral homes will always try to get you to put as much into that trust as possible. Now, on the flip side of that, the funeral home expenses, they are locked in when you prearrange.
If you choose like the casket or whatever you want, then they're locked in.
Yes,
Mhm.
that is locked in. But also the you always have the initial cost that they charge you right off the top, and that is locked in also. It's only what they call cash advance items that are not locked in. Flowers, um, the cemetery costs, just things like that of costs that they cannot control. So when you plan your service, plan your casket or urn, plan your cremation or embalming, whatever you choose to do, that's locked in with the funeral home. But always remember to prearrange your cemetery through your cemetery.
And our cemetery is small enough that all he really does, I think,
It's
is
little.
go out, walk with you, make sure the plot is right, and kind of flag it off. That's about all ours does. Also, I know you wanted to speak on cemetery versus funeral home costs. Did that address that
I
question?
believe it did.
Okay. And then insurance plans versus trust.
There are two different types. two main types, I should say, of prearranged funeral. And that's the funeral trust through the funeral home, where it goes into an account. It's usually irrevocable. And then there's insured. They both have their good and bad things. Insured tends to be a little bit more expensive than the trust on your payments, but that's because it is insured. If you have an insured plan and God forbid 2 months from now you get hit by a truck, your funeral is paid for. It's done. On a trust, you're still going to have those items that you were making payments on. Your family's going to have to come up with that money. And funeral homes very rarely ever do a payment plan after a death. So that's something to keep in mind. The last company I worked for, all they did was funeral trust. And you can do it in a single payment or you can put it out over time.
And that's something I should have mentioned with my brother. Since he's on state services and he gets Medicaid, his trust had to be set up irrevocable, which means the beneficiary of that trust could not be a family member. It had to be irrevocable to the state of Kansas. And so that's something that they do require of you for that to be an allowable expense through our state Medicaid insurance. Also, I had the final expense insurance and commercials that you wanted to address about that.
Don't fall for it. When I see these commercials and I get angry every time because they sound so sincere about you don't want to leave your family with final expenses should something happen to you. Well, the sad fact is that part of life is death. It's not if something happens, it's when. We don't even have to live. We do have to die. And I know this is a sensitive subject, but it is a fact of life. I'm very curious about what happens afterward. Not that I'm looking forward to it, but it is a fact. And what they prey on these final expense commercials is that feeling of protecting your family from what might happen. Um, it doesn't do anything for you. It's an insurance policy, and that is all it is. It does not lock in your prices for your funeral or cemetery. It does not help your family plan. It does not let you know, I should say, it does not let you tell your family what you want. It doesn't allow you to put that down and lock that in. And I believe they're very predatory.
And that's something I do want to address too. If you're making these plans when something has happened, you're so much more emotional and you can tend to
Yes.
spend a lot more money and be more influenced out of the emotion that you're feeling right then. Even though my dad had a pre planned funeral, when we all met to go down there and he wanted to be cremated, they showed us cremation boxes and they showed us a plastic box that his ashes would go in. And every time they closed it, it popped open. And they closed it again and it popped open. And we were like, we can't put dad in that. It won't even stay shut. So we spent extra money beyond his prepaid funeral to get a fancier box. Well, later, reflecting back, when I was less emotional in the moment, I thought, I bet they show that box to everybody because they know it pops open and they know you're going to upscale the cremation box if they show that to you. And then I felt really silly because I kind of felt like I'd been taken a little bit because in the moment I was so emotional. I was like, I can't use this defective type of box. And again, like he was touching on in the commercials, I just did a video on 55 and over scams that I will link at the end of this video and put in the description box. It's very important that we are aware of these types of scams. These commercials are kind of an example of leading you towards that sort of situation. So I hope that that video is also informative and helpful for you. Brent, did you have anything you wanted to add?
What you were just talking about, we in the industry, we actually have a term for it, and that is emotional overspending. And They may be very nice, they may be very friendly, and they may be nice and friendly people, but they're also business people.
Mhm.
They are counting on emotional overspending. I used to call it the nothing's too good for dad situation.
Very much so.
And one of the reasons for that is I understand that at 58 years old, I'm very lucky to still have both my parents. And they have not done
Mhm.
this. They have not prearranged their funeral.
Even though you've spent a lot of years in this industry and encouraged them to do so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, the main reason is because their financial advisor told them not to, because he's looking at it not from the family view, but from the let me build more money for you
Mm-hmm.
view.
And I just discussed financial advisors in my last one of my
Mm-hmm.
last videos where I talked about I'm my own financial advisor.
Yes, and it's one of those topics with my parents that I have broached the topic with them.
Mm-hmm.
But even after my younger sister passed, and it fell to me to make almost all the decisions, and I overspent my parents' money.
Mm-hmm.
And because my sister was so dear to me. And at the end of it, my other sister put her head down in her hands and she said, "You guys are not putting me through this again. You have got to prearrange this." That was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And they still have not done it. And I've finally given up the fight. They're not going to. I'm going to have to do this 2 more times, and I will probably emotionally overspend their money. Maybe Bonita will sit with me and keep me from it,
I don't know.
but she won't. She will be just as emotional as I am, and so you really want to avoid those things. You want to avoid the predatory loans. You want to avoid the emotional overspending. Um, and you really have to look at it away from the emotions. It is a sad fact of life, but it is a fact of life. And the sooner we take care of this, the cheaper it's going to be, and it's not going to be affected by inflation. And so
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend it. I don't recommend any particular vehicle. I don't recommend any particular funeral home. I'm just saying shop. They have to give you their prices. And anymore, they don't even fight that too much. Most places have websites and they'll have pricing on there. Sometimes it's a little difficult to navigate to the prices. I've noticed that. But they do have their prices on the websites, many of them do. But do ask for that GPL, general price list. Don't let them pull you into an office. Oftentimes, it's a lot like a used car situation.
Mm-hmm.
They will want to pull you into the office and try to get you to buy. No, go home, study the materials that you get, talk to your families, tell them what you want, but don't leave it at that. Take care of it, get it paid for, and your family will eventually realize what a gift you have given them.
Yes, and I was going to say that as well. This is one of the best gifts you can give your family is to take care of some of this ahead of time so that they are not left when they're already grieving and they don't know what to do and they're floundering through this for the first time, trying to figure out how they're supposed to handle this stuff. Doing this ahead of time takes so much stress off of the family, and it's kind of like the decluttering that we've talked about in our age group. Getting rid of some of those things takes some of that stress off of your family later on. So we want to do what we can for them ahead of time and not leave them with trying to maneuver through the system when they're already stressed about what they're supposed to do. There hasn't ever been a lot of conversation about this. It's always like a trigger point. So a lot of people don't like to discuss it. Sometimes people don't even want to discuss it with their own families. And having these things done ahead of time can help so much in the end. So I hope that this video has been helpful for you today. Brent, thank you so much for
Happy to.
sharing your knowledge with us today. And I hope to see you on the next video where we get back to some of the normal topics. Have a great week.
Bye bye.